This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
Each year, 1,000 new satellites are being launched. So that was our answer, where we said that using satellite, we can monitor the vegetation, monitor utility infrastructure, etc., and predict the risk of wildfire, provide a maintenance plan to electric utilities and forestry departments so that they can maintain vegetation along the power lines better to reduce the risk.
Hi, everyone. Today, we're talking about wildfires and some innovative technology to prevent them. Climate change-related heat, drought, and what's called thirsty atmospheric conditions increase the risks that come with wildfires. These fires have a real impact. They take human lives, create lasting respiratory health problems, destroy billions of dollars of property, and contribute significantly to global carbon emissions. The 2023 fire in Canada that burned an area the size of North Dakota, for example, emitted more carbon in 5 months than Russia or Japan emitted from fossil fuels in all of 2022. It should be noted, of course, that forests reabsorb carbon as they grow, but still their burning at that scale is a really big problem. Billions of dollars are being invested every year to prevent and limit wildfires, and I was excited to connect with a leading startup in this space to learn about what's working and what challenges need to be solved. Today's guest is Abhishek Singh, co-founder and CEO of AiDash, a company using satellites to help utility companies prevent power line-caused fires. We talk about the problem of climate-related wildfires, the origin of AiDash, how their technology works, who's using it, how they expect to contribute to fire mitigation, what else is needed, and much more. Smokey the Bear says only you can prevent wildfires, but maybe it's only you and thousands of satellites, AI, computer vision, and a growing ecosystem of technology companies and forest management professionals. Anyways, don't mess around with fire and enjoy this episode. Abhishek, welcome to Invested in Climate. So great to have you here today.
Thanks a lot, and it's completely my pleasure to be here today.
Great. Where are you based, Abhishek?
I'm based in Santa Clara, California.
All right, fantastic. Not too far. Abhishek, I'm excited to learn about your company, but let's start by first talking about wildfires. Having experienced several years of nearby wildfires and wildfire smoke, I've become amazed at how wildfires occupy our thoughts and media coverage so inconsistently. Back in 2020, when the sky turned orange here in the Bay Area, there was this feeling that we were living in an inhospitable terrain, and it seemed nearly everyone was talking about whether or not they could stay or where they might possibly go. Then for the past couple of years, the smoke hasn't been so bad, and it's fallen to the back of our minds. Of course, there have been wildfires elsewhere, but if it's not impacting you in a particular moment, it really feels kind of far away as a concern. And I say that while talking to you from a house that has been deemed by my insurance agency as no longer insurable because of wildfire risk, and I'm in an actually pretty urban area. So give us a sense of the state of wildfire risk. Are wildfires becoming more or less of a problem, and how much risk do they pose to people, property, and emissions in the coming years?
To understand this, let's understand what wildfire is and why is it caused, right? And of course, literally, we know what wildfire is, but we see a lot of wildfires happening in, for example, Alaska and many other places. These are natural wildfires. They're supposed to happen, they happen, and they're good for planet. But what we are talking about when we say wildfire is a concern, it is a wildfire which is caused by some man-made cause. It's not natural. And these are wildfires that can and that must be avoided. So that's one important distinction. Not all wildfires are bad. Secondly, when we talk of man-made wildfire or wildfires that should be avoided, before 2017, I think this was not even a newsworthy item. After 2017, it suddenly became a newsworthy item. And that's where people, including AiDash, for example, got into trying to understand what the problem is. The problem is simple to understand. The surface temperature of Earth is increasing. The moisture is reducing in many places. So if we have a high surface temperature with lower moisture content, it means that any potential wildfire trigger event will result in ignition. And if there are too much of dry grasses or dry vegetation around, that wildfire ignition will spread to cause major damage. So most of the wildfires we have seen, for example, in California, have happened in a period which is almost like a couple of weeks of period which were very dry. So the vegetation is dry, temperature is high, moisture content in vegetation is low. And if any ignition, whether caused by utility infrastructure interacting with tree or a human in a campfire or whatsoever, any smallest of the ignition resulted in wildfire. This is what we saw in California. And with time, because it started happening so much in California, the utilities and fire departments in California have been more proactive. As a result, in last couple of years, we have seen less of these wildfires in California, but the temperatures have increased across the country. So we see a lot more wildfire now in Colorado. In fact, as of yesterday, we had wildfire in East Coast. So that's why that is the challenge. These were areas which were not known to have wildfire. So preventive measures which started in California haven't been started here. As a result, we see a lot more wildfire in these areas. And this is what needs to be mitigated.
Right. Let's go deeper into that because there has been a lot of effort to avoid wildfires through better forest management practices, especially after decades of practices that actually led to more fuel for fires and more risk. Give us a quick primer on forest management and how effective these practices are.
So forest management is effective, but within the constraints, right? So when we talk of forest management, we want greenery, we want more trees, and we also want natural barriers so that if a wildfire ignites, it doesn't spread. Now, with development happening in certain areas, we are now in a situation where we have lesser trees in some areas. So we need plantation. That is happening. But the weather changes, especially the dryness and the heat, is not conducive. I mean, we are in end of October and the temperature here is comfortable 70s, right? I mean, we had 90s in a couple of weeks back here in Palo Alto. So there's a kind of, let's call a competition between nature and fire departments and forestry departments where we are trying to improve, but nature is becoming worse. And that is the challenge we are facing. So forest department, forestry will continue to create those barriers and be proactive. Maybe change of species, one activity which is being done, like agave trees are known to be fire retardants, agave plants, sorry. They can be planted instead of dry grasses, which we see in California, and that is being done. So some of those activities are being done to change the landscape to reduce the wildfire probability. But I think it's a catch-up game between nature and human.
Great. Thanks, Abhishek. Tell us now about your company. Let's hear about AiDash and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so AiDash started in 2019, and the trigger point for AiDash was 2017-2018 wildfires in California, which suddenly made it a news. So when we saw those wildfires, etc., right, we, out of academic interest, we tried to explore what the problem is. And those specific wildfires we understood was caused by something which is called utility vegetation management, which means electric utilities have to manage vegetation along the power line. And if there is interaction between the vegetation and power line, it creates an ignition. And if there is conducive environment, which means dry grasses, etc., that ignition can spread to a major wildfire. And that is what happened in some places, in some of the cases in 2017, 2018. So we, with that idea in mind, trying to solve that problem, we explored various technologies. And as you know, right, when we don't have answer in ground, we look up in the sky. And we found our answer in the satellites. The point was, 2019 was also a point of inflection for satellites. Till 2018, there were 2,200 odd satellites in space. From 2019 onwards, each year, 1,000 new satellites are being launched. So that was our answer, where we said that using satellite, we can monitor the vegetation, monitor utility infrastructure, etc., and predict the risk of wildfire, provide a maintenance plan to electric utilities and forestry departments so that they can maintain vegetation along the power lines better to reduce the risk. And that is how AiDash started. Incidentally, we acquired more customers in East Coast initially. So we started doing more work in East Coast, and it took us time to come to California, which even though it was our home.
Abhishek, tell us more about the early days and some of the first iterations. I'd love to get a sense of how the technology that you've created developed and how it's evolved to what you have today.
So when we started the company, we understood that the need is to identify vegetation in close proximity to power line, flag that so that they can be trimmed, and also to identify unhealthy trees, which has few months of life left. So a major wind event, even a minor wind event, can make those trees fall onto power lines. That was the technical problem. We initially thought we'll do it using drones, which looks like an obvious choice. But drones fly not more than 4 to 7 miles per day. And US has 7 million miles of power line. So it was very clear that the solution will not scale. So the next iteration which we did was aerial survey, which also turned out to be expensive and less scalable. And only then we got into satellites. And as soon as we got into satellites, the data which we saw, since we have 30 centimeter resolution, which is 1 foot resolution satellite imagery available, so we can see things in a lot of clarity. So as soon as we saw that, we realized that's where the solution lies technically, and we started solving. It took us almost a year to get our first major customer. We got our first customer in January 2020. But since then, we have been more than doubling every year. And today we serve more than 100 utilities. So it has been a good journey since then. And along with that, our technology also has evolved to do a lot more than vegetation management. Apart from vegetation management, we also are able to proactively predict wildfire risks and propose mitigating actions. We're able to proactively predict outages during a wind event as to where those outages will happen and where the people can station resources, etc. So we are developing modules to support our electric utility customers more and more.
Let's zoom in one level. I think that you've made clear that you're really reliant on satellites, and a great opportunity given how many more satellites are launching and how the technology is improving. The satellites send back to Earth presumably images, and I think, is that where AI comes in? I imagine that it's so much data that you need to have machines analyzing what's coming back, and presumably that's also part of your technology that can continuously improve in analyzing the data more effectively and quicker. Tell us about that part of what the data is and how the analysis works.
That's a very interesting question, because when we think satellite, we think Google Maps, right? The base layers of Google Maps, satellite view. But it's important to understand that those good looking maps are what we call visual bands, red, green, blue, RGB bands. But a typical satellite imagery consists of much more than that. So a typical satellite imagery pixel, which is 1 foot by 1 foot pixel, contains RGB bands. It contains near infrared band. It contains red edge. It contains coastal blue. It also contains many SWIR bands, which is shortwave infrared. So each pixel of satellite imagery has a lot of information, some of which can be seen by human, some of which cannot be seen by human. So when we adapt AI, the first step is to identify that each pixel which we are seeing, is that pixel a vegetation pixel or not? The second step is to identify height of that pixel. Third step is to identify proximity of that pixel to the power line. Fourth step is to identify health of the pixel, whether that pixel means a dead or declining tree or it means a healthy tree. So all those computations are made using computer vision and AI, as well as, let's call it, time series AI, right? Which is not computer vision, but understanding and measuring the signals of other non-visual bands. And combination of both helps us give the correct picture. And one point I missed here, you would say it's a 2D image. So how do we get height of tree and spread of a tree and its canopy? That's important. So what we do is, in astronomy, we know that we can find the height of a mountain on Mars, or a depth of something on Moon. That is done through what we call stereoscopic imaging. So we take imagery of single point from two different angles, and hence we are able to identify height or get 3D perception. And that is what we do using satellite imagery also. So while all those bands are information is available, for each pixel we have images taken from two different angles also. that gives us 3D understanding of land and vegetation.
Fascinating. You mentioned that you're now working with over 100 utilities. Congratulations. That's great reach. Most listeners probably aren't aware of all the things that utilities need to think about to keep the lights on and prevent a fire risk. Help us step inside their workflow and help us understand the types of things their teams are dealing with that AiDash helps address.
This is interesting. And in fact, last week we had a AiDash conference called Evolve. And this is the exact topic with which I started. As a kid, I was very excited, very happy to see a power outage. It means I don't need to do homework. If it's in the evening, I can play with my friends, etc. If it extends even further, next day the school would be closed. So being in India, that was very interesting. Being in India, power outage was an exciting thing for me as a child. But when I moved here to US, I thought power outage will never happen. But I realized that power outage does happen in US, and impact of power outage in US is far severe than in developing countries like India. Because in India, because we know power outages will happen, we have lots of backups. For example, most houses will have generators, etc., etc. Here, those are not there. So, power outage in winter or even a hot summer can be very problematic to old age people, etc. So, it's a serious problem, right? So, that was one understanding. Then, going into yes, the fact is that we press a bulb and light the bulb, we see light. It feels like a magic. I mean, we take it for granted. But for that to happen, so much needs to be done. Utilities have to generate power based on demand. They cannot generate more. So, for example, if demand fluctuates and they have generated more, there are scenarios when they have to switch on the lights of empty stadiums so that the power can be consumed, because the power cannot be stored on wire. That will cause the wire to ignite, right? So it's a big challenge. First challenge is how much to generate. And dynamically, we don't know what the load is going to be, right? That's what is called dynamic power management, etc., where we generate those power as per demand. DERMS and other technologies and various companies are involved in that. Then the second aspect after generation is distribution. It has to go through transmission line to different regions, and from there to substation to distribution lines. What we see near our home are distribution lines. US has 6.5 million miles of distribution line. Each mile distribution line has almost 40 poles. So we're talking of more than 200 million poles. Each pole has several attachments. Some of them have transformers, but each pole has various attachments. So we're talking of almost 1 billion devices. And each pole is surrounded by few trees. So talk of billions of trees. All these 200 million poles, billion devices, billions of trees need to be inspected every year to ensure there is no problem. It's a huge and humanly impossible problem to solve. And these are the challenges which utilities face. And this is not enough. This is where we are today, right? And electric utility infrastructure has not been upgraded for last 50 years or so in developed countries. And now with coming of EV and most of energy being electric, there's a need to increase the capacity of this distribution and transmission grid by 3 times. The grid is choking even today. To increase the capacity by 3 times is extremely difficult. If all cars in California become EV, the capacity has to be increased by more than 3 times just to support car charging. So these are the challenges which from outside we don't appreciate. But as we get into it, we understand that utilities are doing a very complex job and trying to solve complex problems.
Abhishek, over 100 utilities, and I understand that your platform now monitors over 1 million miles of power lines, gives us a sense of the scale. Help us understand how much of the market you're currently covering compared to what you expect to be able to cover in the coming years.
With 1 million miles, we are looking at approximately over 10% of market in US with respect to customers whom we are engaged with. This also includes, let's understand, US, for example, has 200 odd investor-owned utilities and approximately 3,000 small utilities, co-ops, munis, etc. That's the market size. So there are 3,200 utilities typically. Like, for example, at my place, I get power from Santa Clara Power, Silicon Valley Power, which is a co-op here. So we are serving both set of markets. So yeah, the current penetration, I would say, is at around 10% in US.
Great. And as you scale, tell us, what does it introduce in terms of either opportunities or challenges in terms of the data and what you're able to do with it? Does that sort of scale improve your compute and your ability to process it? Or does it get intrinsically more complex as you grow?
Fortunately, this is an area where technology in last 3-4 years have exponentially improved. So the compute capability or the AI capabilities have significantly exponentially improved in last 3-4 years. Hence, compute itself or processing itself, infrastructure for that is not a challenge we see. Yes, the algorithms are getting more and more complex. As we get more and more and better data, we always can predict too many things. When we started, we were predicting only what is called clearance, the distance between vegetation and power line. Then we started doing health of tree vegetation. Then we also started identifying soil. What kind of soil is there? Because that's also a factor in likelihood of failure of a tree. Then we started getting into species. Can we identify species of a tree? And we also got started into what we call accessibility, land accessibility. Okay, this is a pole which needs to be inspected. What kind of equipment can go on that pole, right? Depending on the road and accessibility. If it is back lot, utility worker has to take a different equipment. If it is on road, utility worker has to take different equipment. So what happens is more and more data is coming, more and more processing capabilities available, but we are building more and more algorithms, right? So that's a catch-up game which we play. But I would say infrastructure is not going to be a problem. Yes, the AI itself creating those algorithms are big challenges which our team works on.
What's next from a technical perspective? What do you hope to be able to do in the future that you can't do now and that gets you really excited?
One thing which I learned in this journey of last 5 years is that utilities work in silos. So, for example, for same infrastructure, there's a different team which manages vegetation and inspection of vegetation along the power line, and there's a different team which manages assets, the poles, the transformers, etc., and inspection of assets along the power line. These are two parallel activities which every utility does. Our belief is that both of these two activities can be combined. As data quality improves, for example, we expect to see 10 centimeter resolution satellite imagery from next year, which can do a lot more than 30 centimeter resolution, which we have today. So as this technology improves, we will be able to do a lot more. We'll be able to identify defects, small cracks on a pole or a structure, for example. And that will help us combine these two use cases of maintenance of vegetation and maintenance of assets into a single platform at the same or almost similar cost and serve the utilities better. Because at the end of the day, problem is holistic. A leaning pole in a storm is more likely to fail than a straight standing pole. So we know where trees are, where storm is coming, but we need to also know which poles are leaning. So that's the combination of information. We have recently announced our platform, which serves that purpose. In absence of 10 centimeter imagery, we are combining other data sources like LiDAR and aerial imagery. So the model will work with satellite plus other data sources so that we are able to serve customers across vegetation and asset inspection and monitoring services as a single solution.
Abhishek, Google recently launched a satellite monitoring capability. They're partnering with the U.S. Forest Service on a project called FireSat. It's a constellation of satellites dedicated entirely to detecting and tracking wildfires. And this is straight from their website. It will provide global high-resolution imagery that is updated every 20 minutes, enabling the detection of wildfires that are roughly the size of a classroom. What do you think of this effort, and does it impact your business at all?
This is very good effort, and it actually helps us in our business. So let's understand this, right? I earlier said that some ignition has to happen, and then spread of that ignition has to happen. We are trying to predict where ignition is more likely so that we can create natural boundaries, like maybe we can remove all the grasses there, dry grasses there, to reduce the chance of spread of that ignition, and will reduce the chance of ignition itself by maintaining assets better. That is the problem we are trying to solve. But we are trying to solve this problem in and around the power line, which is the right of way, right, of the electric utility. What if ignition happens 500 feet away, 1,000 feet away? That ignition can also reach power line. The electric lines needs to be de-energized to make sure that it doesn't cause major accident, right? I mean, people can lose life in that situation. So real-time monitoring of wildfire or ignition, even normal smallest of the fires, is a significant value add to all companies similar to us. Because we know we are not doing real-time monitoring, right? We're trying to predict where it can happen. If we see a fire happening in an area which we are not monitoring through services like Google Earth, right? Because we have vegetation connectivity, we will know if that, and we have weather information, we know if that wildfire will spread towards electric assets. We know whether this wildfire spreads towards houses, etc. So we can warn properly, and proper actions like de-energizing power line can be done. So it's a very welcome step, and we have seen the APIs. They look promising, and in fact, we should be using that for my tech team to decide better. We are already exploring that.
Let's circle back to the original question of risk. How safe should we feel? Will technology like yours ultimately really reduce or remove the risk of wildfires?
I would say the risk of wildfires in areas where technology were aggressively used, like in some places in California, has reduced. I mean, we still have wildfire. We had wildfire, I think, near East Bay somewhere a few days back. But the probability of wildfire and impact of wildfire is reducing. But it's coming at a cost of inconvenience. So if there's a hot day with wind, we'll have planned shutdown. Hot day is when we need our air conditioners the most. So we are avoiding risk, which is helping us feel safer, but at a big inconvenience to our life, right? In terms of not being able to switch on AC when the day is the hottest. So those are challenges which we still need to mitigate. Answer to that is how surgical can we be in terms of prediction? And as data sets keep building up, with time we will become more and more surgical. So we are in the right direction, and we should continue to feel safer as we move along. But areas which have not seen wildfires in past are seeing it more and more. So in a way, the problem of wildfire is moving from west to east. That's an area where, because of learning we have, because we know how much damage it caused in west coast, we can be proactive in fixing those proactively. And that is where the industry should move. And fortunately, the government is spending and allocating a lot of money to electric grids, electric utilities, to invest in the technologies.
What else should we be doing? So you've mentioned other government programs and investments. What other innovations, investments, or practices do we need to help address wildfire risk?
Yeah, so one important practice can be what I would call exchange of information between different entities involved. So we have fire department, and this works different in different states. So we have fire departments, we have electric utilities, we have other utilities, we have some other government bodies, right? So how much of real-time information is being shared between these departments is something which is significant value addition. Because in an active wildfire scenario, fire department is most knowledgeable of what is happening. How soon can that information, how real-time can that information be passed to other departments and utilities would be something very helpful. I mean, 20 minutes is what a satellite takes to take a next image, but 20 minutes can be too much if wind is moving fast in a direction in a heavily vegetated place. Those are some areas where I would say the softwares used by these departments should start talking to each other.
Abhishek, before we close out, it's worth noting that beyond wildfire resilience, you also have a product that helps with biodiversity and wildlife habitats. I'd love to learn more. Biodiversity loss is, of course, an enormous problem, but seems to be much more nascent in terms of an innovation space. Regulation and investor pressure hasn't lined up yet to drive as much investment. But I'm curious what your technology does, the business model behind it, and the longer term, how you see this space evolving.
So first thing first, biodiversity, the impact of biodiversity on planet Earth is many times more than impact of carbon on planet Earth. However, lots and lots of initiatives in last few years were targeted towards carbon, which is important. But as you said, much lesser initiatives have started towards biodiversity. I mean, there are minor initiatives here and there. For example, in US, we have watershed management to some extent. But there is no proactive, consolidated effort on improving biodiversity of our land in US. But biodiversity has been given more importance in Europe, especially UK. And UK probably was the first country to make biodiversity net gain legally binding for all development projects and all major landowners. That law has started to be enforced since April this year. And that is where our technology currently sells in UK market, in UK. And with time, as similar laws we are expecting to be adapted in Europe, it will expand to Europe. Unfortunately, no such law exists in North America today. So that's about the impetus, and that's why we started something in UK and Europe. Secondly, what we do here is simple. Identifying habitat, right? Okay, this is a waterland, this is a wasteland, this is a modified grassland, etc. Identifying the habitats and measuring the biodiversity units to be able to measure what the baseline is today and what a 10% net gain will mean and what changes we need to do to get 10% net gain on my land. This is also a critical piece of the legislation. A majority of the gain has to be done in the same land. This is very important. I mean, we can damage biodiversity in US and we do something in some remote place in the continent. It doesn't help locally, right? Biodiversity is very local. This is an important aspect which should be considered in any future legislation on biodiversity net gain, that the gain has to be local. You cannot just buy an offset from somewhere. So that's one aspect. But technology-wise, same technology. Using satellite, we monitor the land, measure the habitat type, etc., what kind of flora and fauna is there on the land, give it a biodiversity net gain score, and create a plan for measurement and monitoring.
Abhishek, leave us with some parting thoughts on something that's been encouraging you amidst this enormous task of preventing and limiting wildfires.
What I would say is that technology today is mature. Industry is willing to invest. When I started AiDash, a company which would sell to electric utilities, in my first 1 year, every investor scared me, right? Every investor told me, no, you can't sell to utilities. It's very difficult. My personal experience was very different. We were able to sell fast to electric utilities. So what I want to say is that there's some old baggage which we have in our minds that utilities are slow industry, not adapting technologies. Those are wrong packages. They are adapting technology fast. They are trying to do whatever they can within the limitations we have, right? In terms of manpower. I mean, there's not enough labor. That's a bigger problem than anything else today. So they're working. So what we need to do is we need to change our mindset and understand that changes are happening individually from our side. Whatever we can do to mitigate, we can be careful when we are going out for that picnic in the forest and so on. Those things which we need to understand. And of course, some inconveniences which we see during the plant shutdown on hot days is something which we'll have to accept as part of our life till the infrastructure is fully upgraded and we have a longer solution.
Abhishek, thank you so much for your time today. All the best of luck with the important work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks a lot for your time. And thanks, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.